The first thing Josephine Kestrel noticed about Larkspur Hollow was the silence. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that settles over a place after something is broken and no one has bothered to sweep up the pieces. She stood at the edge of the Colby ranch with a carpet bag in one hand and a letter in the other. A letter from a man she had never met, written in a hand so unsteady it looked like the words themselves were afraid of her. Miss Kestrel, my brother needs tending. He will not welcome you. Come anyway. Amos Colby, Wyoming Territory, 1889. The wind carried the smell of wet pine and wood smoke, and somewhere behind the ranch house, a dog was barking at nothing. The door opened before she knocked. A man stood in the frame, a rifle loose in one hand, not raised, just present, the way some men carry grief. His jaw was shadowed with days-old stubble, and one leg bent wrong beneath him, braced against the doorframe like it no longer trusted the rest of his body. "Whoever sent you," he said, voice low and flat, "wasted your fare." Josephine held his gaze. "Nobody sent me for nothing, Mr. Colby. I was sent for you." "Then you're too late to save me." She didn't flinch. She had heard men say worse, in worse places, and meant it less. "I didn't come to save you," she whispered. "I came to stay anyway." The door didn't close. Not yet. And somewhere in that half-second of hesitation, before he turned away and left it open behind him, something in Caleb Colby's chest remembered what it felt like to be looked at like a man, and not a warning. If a story like this stays with you, subscribe and join us for more journeys of hope, love, and quiet redemption. Larkspur Hollow was the kind of town where everybody's business belonged to everybody else, and Caleb Colby's business had belonged to the whole valley since the fire at the Standish mine 2 winters past. He had gone in after 4 men. He had come out with 3, a leg that never healed right, and a silence that never lifted. The 4th man had been his best friend since boyhood. The town called Caleb a hero at first. Then, when he stopped coming to church, stopped courting the widow Ellery who'd once fancied him, stopped doing anything but working his cattle alone from sunup to dark, they called him something else. Bitter. Broken. Cursed, some of the older women whispered, crossing themselves when his wagon rattled past. His younger brother Amos ran the feed store in town and watched his brother fold inward year by year, like a barn slowly giving way under snow nobody thought to shovel. Out of desperation, he had written to a doctor he knew in Cheyenne, asking if the man might recommend a nurse willing to take private work far from town, half expecting nothing to come of it. The doctor passed the letter to a widow in his care named Josephine Kestrel, and within the month, Amos had her answer. She would come. He wrote back only with directions to the ranch and little else. He didn't dare promise her a welcome he couldn't guarantee. She had her own reasons for wanting to be far from Cheyenne, reasons she folded up small and kept in the same place she kept her late husband's watch, close, but not spoken of. She had trained as a nurse during the influenza that swept the rail camps, and she had learned in rooms full of dying men that some wounds don't show on the skin at all. She settled into the small room off the kitchen without complaint, learned which floorboards creaked, which windows stuck in damp weather, how the ranch woke before dawn to the sound of cattle lowing and Amos's boots on the porch steps. She scrubbed pots that hadn't seen soap in months and hung fresh curtains without asking permission, small claims staked quietly, the way a person marks territory not to conquer it, but to make it bearable to live in. Caleb made it plain, in the weeks that followed, that he wanted no part of her kindness. He left before breakfast. He ate his supper in the barn. When she changed the dressing on his leg, he stared at the wall like she was a duty to be endured rather than a person in the room. "You don't have to talk to me," she told him one evening, wrapping clean linen around the old wound while lamplight flickered gold across the rafters. "But I'd be obliged if you'd stop looking at me like I'm a debt collector." "Aren't you?" he said. "Amos is paying you. Amos is paying my train fare. He can't buy what I choose to feel about the people I tend." Caleb said nothing, but his jaw unclenched just slightly, and outside, the wind moved through the larkspur growing wild along the fence line, tall, violet-blue, stubborn things that came back every spring, no matter how hard the winter had been. By the end of Act 1, the town had begun to talk. A woman, unmarried, living under a bachelor's roof, however respectably arranged. It was enough for tongues to wag after Sunday service. Widow Ellery, still nursing her own old wound of rejection, made sure the whispers reached Josephine's ears directly. "He'll never let you close," Ellery said, with the practiced gentleness of someone delivering a cruelty as a kindness. "He didn't let me, and I knew him before the fire." That night, Josephine sat by the window a long while, watching the larkspur bend in the dark, and did not write the letter home she had half composed in her mind, asking to be reassigned. Trust, when it comes, rarely comes as a single moment. It comes in inches. It came the morning Caleb's fever broke, and he woke to find Josephine asleep in the chair beside his bed, still in her day dress, a basin of water gone cold on her lap. He watched her a long moment before waking her, and something in him, something that had been braced for 2 years, loosened by a fraction he didn't examine too closely. It came in small trades of conversation across the porch rail. She told him about the rail camps, about holding a stranger's hand through a night no medicine could fix. He told her in pieces about the mine, not the fire itself, not yet, but the sound of it, the sound he still heard some nights. It came the afternoon she found him trying and failing to mend a section of split fence rail, his bad leg buckling under him in the mud. Instead of rushing to help, she simply picked up the other end of the rail and held it steady while he hammered the nail home. "You're not going to ask if I need help?" he said, breathing hard. "You'd say no," she said. "I'm not asking. I'm just here." He looked at her then, really looked, and for the first time since the fire, something like a smile reached his eyes, if not quite his mouth. Autumn came, and with it, a harvest dance in town that Amos all but forced his brother to attend. Caleb stood at the edge of the hall, the way he stood at the edge of everything now. But when Josephine crossed the floor toward him, rather than waiting to be asked, he didn't turn away. They didn't dance, his leg wouldn't allow it, but they stood together near the open doors, and for one unguarded hour, Caleb Colby laughed, and the whole room seemed to hold its breath at the sound of it, as if they'd forgotten he still could. It didn't last. Ellery, watching from across the hall, made certain the moment didn't pass unspoiled. She approached Josephine near the cider table, and, in a voice pitched just loud enough, remarked that it was a shame Josephine hadn't been told the whole truth about the mine, that Caleb had been the one who chose which men went in first, and that the friend he'd lost had begged to be sent home to his new wife that very morning. The words landed like a struck match. Josephine didn't confront Caleb that night, but she watched him differently, not with less warmth, but with a new understanding of the weight he carried, and the fear crept in that perhaps some grief truly was too heavy to be shared, only witnessed from a careful distance. When she finally asked him directly, walking the fence line beneath a sky bruised purple with coming winter, Caleb stopped walking entirely. "I chose the order we went in," he said. "I put myself last. Tom went in third, not first. He didn't beg to go home. I told him to stay outside, and he didn't listen, because he never listened, because that's who he was." His voice cracked, just once, like ice giving way. "I've spent 2 years letting this town believe whatever punishes me most. It was easier than the truth." "What is the truth?" "That some men die doing exactly what they'd choose to do again, and the ones left behind don't get to decide that was wrong. We just have to live with not being the one it happened to." Josephine reached for his hand, the first time she had done so without a bandage or a duty between them, and he did not pull away. But that same week, a letter arrived from Cheyenne. Josephine's late husband's family, wealthy and unforgiving of the choices she'd made since his death, had located her and demanded she return to settle his estate, and more pointedly, to abandon what they called an unsuitable arrangement in the territories. She had a choice to make: a life with means and a name that opened doors waiting for her in Cheyenne, or a broken-legged rancher in a town that whispered about her, in a house that wasn't hers, beside a man who had never once asked her to stay. She told Caleb she had to go, at least for a time, to settle what needed settling. She did not tell him she wasn't certain she'd return, because she wasn't certain, and she had learned never to promise a wounded man more than she could carry through. For 3 days after her wagon disappeared down the frozen road, Caleb Colby did something he had not done in 2 years. He went to church. He sat in the back pew, leg aching in the cold, and when the service ended, he did not leave. He found Widow Ellery in the churchyard and told her, plainly and without cruelty, the truth about the mine, not to defend himself, but because he was tired of letting a lie do the work grief should have done honestly. Ellery wept and apologized for reasons that were as much her own as his. Then he did something harder. He wrote to Cheyenne, not to Josephine, but to her late husband's family, a short, unflinching letter explaining who she was to the people of Larkspur Hollow. Not a scandal, not an unsuitable arrangement, but the reason a broken man had remembered how to stand up straight. He signed it, sealed it, and for the first time since the fire, rode the 6 miles to town on horseback instead of by wagon, refusing to let the leg decide what he could no longer do. Josephine returned in early spring, the estate settled, her husband's name and money left behind, along with every obligation attached to them. She had not written ahead. She simply arrived, the way she had the first time, with a bag in one hand and nothing but her own decision in the other. Caleb was waiting at the fence line where the larkspur was just beginning to push up through the last of the snow, the same stubborn purple blooms that had watched every quiet, unspoken thing pass between them. "You came back," he said. "I told you once," Josephine said. "I didn't come to save you." "I remember." "I came to stay. That hasn't changed." He crossed the distance between them slower than most men would, his legs still uneven, still marked by fire and guilt and 2 winters of silence, but steady this time in the ways that mattered. "I'm not fixed," he said. "I don't think I ever will be, not all the way. I never asked you to be." She reached up and rested her palm against his jaw, the way she once had when tending a wound, except now there was no bandage between them, nothing clinical in the touch at all. "I only ever asked to be here while you figured out how to carry it." Larkspur Hollow talked, as it always did, when Caleb Colby married the widowed nurse from Cheyenne that summer in a small ceremony at the ranch, the same wildflowers gathered into a bouquet tied with plain twine. But the talk had changed its shape. It was no longer about what Caleb had lost in the fire. It was about what had grown back, slow and stubborn, in the years since, the way larkspur always does, no matter how hard the winter, no matter how certain everyone was that nothing could survive it. Some wounds, it turned out, were never meant to be saved from. They were only ever meant to be stayed with, and that, more than any cure, was what finally let them heal.